Welcome, everybody, to the CrySP speaker series on privacy. It's our great pleasure today to have Professor Pamela Wisniewski. Professor Wisniewski comes from the University of Central Florida, where her work studies online safety, privacy, and social media, particularly for adolescents. And that's what she'll be talking to us about today. If you have a question, you can use the Q&A feature of Zoom. And if you ask your question there, I will raise it to the speaker at an appropriate break in the talk. Okay, take it away.
Awesome. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. All right. Perfect. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me here today. I usually like to see faces and to be able to have an open mic conversation with folks as I do my presentation. But I know in the webinar, it might not be conducive to that. So please feel free to put questions over in the Q&A box, and we can stop the talk at any time just to have a little bit of extra conversation about that, because it's more important that you have a fun and engaging talk today rather than me just getting through all my slides. So with that in mind, today I'm going to be talking about my research on risk and resilience in the context of promoting adolescent online safety and privacy through human-centered computing. Just a little bit of background about me. I'm currently an associate professor at the University of Central Florida. I am the director of the Socio-Technical Interaction Research Lab, or the STIR Lab, as well as the Industry-Focused User Experience Academy. My research in HCI is at the intersection of social computing, which is how we use technology to connect with one another, and privacy, the unintended consequences that occur when we're online trying to engage with others. One of the key proponents in my research is that privacy is often a secondary concern online, and it's usually not people's goal. Put it this way. Nobody goes online to be more private. So in HCI, because we're user-centered, one of the things that we want to do is help people achieve their goals of why they're going online while maintaining their privacy. So most of my funded research is in the space of adolescent online safety and risks. And I just want to acknowledge the sponsors of my work, including the National Science Foundation and the William T. Grant Foundation, which is a private foundation that's mission is to reduce inequality among youth. Oh, and also just any opinions, findings, or conclusions expressed in my research are my own and not those of my sponsors. So I'm going to talk today about some of my most synergistic research efforts. First, talking about my NSF Career Award, which is safety by design, using co-design as a way to empower youth online. And also talking about my William T. Grant Award, which is protecting at-risk or more vulnerable youth from online sexual predation risk, to an NSF grant that I have for the Partnerships for Innovation, where we're using a human-centered approach to improve risk detection algorithms for preemptive interventions for online safety. So first, what do we know about teens and technology? Well, we know that they're avid and eager adopters of most technologies. And in fact, we can often not take these technologies away from them because it's so ingrained in their lives. But what do teens say about social media and technology use and the impact it's had on their lives? Well, according to Pew Research in 2018, 31% said that the effect has mostly been positive, being able to provide resources and socialization that they weren't able to access in the past, where 45% were pretty ambivalent of saying there's both pros and cons, with about a quarter saying that the net effect of social media and technology has been negative, from addictive technology use to cyberbullying and just the drama and the social comparisons that can lead to mental health challenges for youth. But it's this 24% negative impact of social media and technology for teens that tends to become the main narrative of teens and technology use in our society, where we focus mostly on these risk narratives. For instance, 1 in 9 teens have encountered cyberbullying online. 1 in 11, probably more than this now, have received an unwanted sexual solicitation, and almost all teens have seen explicit content online. And these are some of the headlines that we can commonly see in the news, talking about sextortion and cyberbullying, linking this to depression, mental health issues, and even suicide. So the problem of focusing on this quarter reports from teens of these negative effects is that it promotes what we call the psychology of fear. So what happens when we make our decisions based on fear? For instance, in the Trump administration, what did we try to do to keep outsiders out that we were scared of? We tried to build a wall. And similarly, this is kind of the approach that we take with teens. We become more authoritarian. We want to shield them and protect them from these online risks to be able to get the situation under our control, to keep them safe, fix the problem, because ultimately their future's at stake, right? So the problem of taking this more authoritarian approach to online safety for teens is that ultimately we're sending them mixed messages. On one hand, we want teens to care about their privacy, but on the other hand, we develop solutions like parental control apps that take all of their privacy away. On one hand, we want teens to earn our trust, but on the other hand, we're using apps like Life 360 to be able to track their every movement. Furthermore, a fear-based approach to online safety emphasizes abstinence-only approaches to risk prevention. And what we know from the research is that abstinence-based approaches to other things like sexual education are ineffective. Furthermore, we don't want to equate all risk exposure to harm. Encountering some level of risky interactions in life is actually a healthy part of youth's development to help them learn how to cope with risks and to mature into thoughtful adults. And we don't want to disempower youth by over-coddling them and not being able to teach them how to protect themselves online. This quote is actually from Dana Boyd's book on It's Complicated, the Social Lives of Network Teens. And it was one of the kind of mission statements that drove me down this path of doing my teen-centered research. Is as a society, we often spend so much time worrying about young people that we fail to account for how our paternalism and protectionism hinders their ability to become informed, thoughtful, and engaged adults. So in my research, I want to talk about some of the things that we found in our earlier research and then go to cover some of the current projects that we have going on now. So one of the first things that we found from a diary study of 68 parents and teens is that teens see more online than we think. This quote from a 15-year-old girl kind of epitomizes that point. Oh, hun, it's the internet. Half of it's porn to start with. The other half is contaminated by violent material, illegal material, depression, anxiety, and morally dubious events by nature. It would be really a miracle if you managed to be on the internet without it. But another thing that we found out in our research that we don't often see in those news headlines is that teens deal with these situations better than we give them credit for. For instance, these experiences give youth the opportunity to exhibit empathy to others. For instance, this 13-year-old teen saw somebody cutting on Instagram and said that someone posted on their Instagram a picture of their scars, and I commented, "Stay strong." But this is really tough stuff. And she said, but one comment will not save her life. So looking at this made us realize that, as adults and as parents, one of the things that we need to be doing is educating our young teens, even at the age of 13 years old, on how to handle and to be able to process really heavy things like cutting and self-harm, instead of just trying to assume that we're going to be able to shield them from these types of experiences. Another 14-year-old female points out how while most teens might be asked for unwanted or a proposition for unwanted sexual solicitations online, the positive thing is that we don't talk about often is that most of them say no. She said that one of my friends asked for pictures and I said no. I didn't give them any idea that I was going to do it. I was random. And this seemed like a common occurrence among the participants in our sample, where they knew how to protect their privacy and to say no in most situations. It was actually in the more nuanced situations where it was a boyfriend or girlfriend, where they had a harder time being able to navigate those boundaries. Sorry. So what are some ways that we can make online safety for teens more teen-centered? So what we learned from our early research is, one, that we should treat online safety as a developmental process. Between the ages of 8 to 12 is when maybe we should use those training wheels, when youth are first given technology, not giving them open access, but that's the time to use the parental controls for filtering and to be able to monitoring their use so that you can co-use it with them and teach them instructionally how to use the technology responsibly. But between the ages of 13 and 15, taking off those training wheels to teach them how to navigate these potentially risky situations themselves, to focus on building risk coping skills. And then by the ages of 16 and 18, by and large, most teens don't want their parents in their business because they're trying to enact their autonomy and individuate themselves. And they need important things like privacy to be able to make some calculated risks and explore their social identities. And importantly, it's important for us to have deep breaths and withhold judgment throughout this process, because it is a process of developmental growth. Another point that I like to make is that we need to teach them how to navigate the internet safely. Now, you wouldn't take your 16-year-old teen and just give them the keys to your car and say, go ahead and go drive. But essentially, that's what we're doing with even our younger children, the age of 8 or below, giving them digital devices like cell phones and just saying, okay, well, I'm going to trust you with this until you breach my trust. And then we get blindsided when they crash and burn. So instead, we need to take moments to teach what safety means, such as being able to have strong passwords and just what inappropriate and appropriate behavior is. Just an example from my own life and my own daughter, who's 7. When she was about 4 years old, she called me on my phone while I was in the middle of a work meeting. And all of a sudden, I saw her naked butt dancing over her tablet screen. And my first reaction as a parent was, oh my God, I can't believe she's doing this. This is so inappropriate. And I wanted to go over there and tell her and punish her for her behavior. But instead, I took that deep breath and I realized that maybe she doesn't understand the difference between being naked with mommy at home and talking to mommy on Facebook Messenger and being naked. And so I went and I talked to her and I said, honey, why did you do that? And she said, well, mommy, you said that it's okay for me to be naked with just you and me and with mommy and daddy. And I was just talking to you. I wasn't talking to anybody else. And so I had to explain to her that, you know, when the internet's involved and you're transmitting it over, well, the internet, I don't want to call them tubes because clouds or whatever metaphor we want to use with our children, that you're no longer alone. And that the company, which at the time was Facebook Messenger, also can have access to that data. And so now it's a conversation between the 3 of us instead of just mommy and her. And by being able to take that moment to teach her, she's now able to make better decisions about how she conducts her behavior when she's using real-time messaging. Also, one of our papers, we called it Let's Talk About Sex, that was published in CHI 2020, showed that most teens are now treating sexting as a natural progression of romantic relationships. And so when we talk about things like sex education and safe sex, we need to start incorporating what that means in digital equivalents. We also have another paper that was published later in CSCW where we looked at the comments on a mental health peer support platform about how teens give each other advice about how to safely sext. And some of the things that they said to one another were things like, well, if you're going to send a naked picture, make sure you don't capture your face in it. And so being able to think about it, not from the advantage of abstinence of like saying, don't do it, and we just need to protect and prevent, changing the conversation to give practical advice on some of these encounters and how we can handle things like cyberbullying and sexual solicitations and just sexual interactions online with our youth without that level of judgment. So ultimately, we moved to a resilience-based approach to online safety rather than an abstinence-based one. We drew this from the Adolescent Resilience Framework, which is couched in developmental psychology and has been applied to many youth risk-taking behaviors, from encountering sexual abuse to drug addiction and use and premature pregnancies. Now, the thing that I like about this resilience framework is that it's a strength-based rather than a deficit-based approach to adolescent development, where it's focusing on the assets and resources available to help teens overcome exposure to risk rather than necessarily preventing it. And the key to resilience is that resilience cannot occur in the absence of risk. So if you've become like this rich, successful, well-adjusted adult, and you never had to overcome any adversity or problems, you can't say that you're resilient, you can say that you're lucky. So resilience is something that can be fostered and facilitated and grown, and it doesn't have to be resilience of the individual. It could also be the social ecologies of support within a youth's life, such as their peers, their family members, their school, etc. So through this research, we tried to start making new headlines about online safety that away from those risk narratives of being able to say, let's teach teens how to navigate the internet safely by teaching them ways to cope with risks and to move away from this fear-based narrative that really kind of just gives us a sense of fatigue on saying that if all teens are at risk online all the time and it's killing their mental health, then there's nothing to do about it. Instead, making it more evidence-based, saying strategies that we can take to protect teens, their safety, and their privacy online. With that, I wrote my NSF Career Proposal, and it was funded, thank goodness. And it was about using co-design and the principle of safety by design to proactively design software technologies and features within technologies that promote safety for adolescents rather than taking more preventative abstinence-only based approaches. So these are just some of the objectives from the proposal, as well as some of the impact and outcomes and achievements that we've made thus far. Just to cover one example from this body of work is we developed an app called Circle of Trust. Now, this was a play on the traditional parental control app, which basically looks a lot like spyware that you install on a teen's device that really has no interface or benefit to them, but allows a parent to see, to restrict information, like such as the apps that they have installed on their devices, as well as to be able to monitor all of the messages that they send and receive, sometimes in real time, other times more based on like a interval report. So what we did is we created Circle of Trust as this feature that mediates the privacy level. So here, we created an app that has an interface for both the parent and the teen. The teen, it's important for them to see what risks are flagged by the app, in addition to be able to have that information to raise their own level of risk awareness. A teen, once this app's installed on their device, can request for one of their contacts or multiple contacts to be placed into their circle of trust. And if a parent agrees to placing that person in the circle of trust, then instead of getting the content of each and every message, instead they get a sentiment score for when at the time the message is sent in real time. But then they only get to see content if it was risk flagged. And the idea behind this is being able to alleviate some of that practical obscurity within the apps that by giving parents enough information to be able to do some triaging of risky situations, but also affording the teens some level of agency and privacy to interact with others. So we did a user study with 17 parent-child pairs between the ages of 19 and 17. And what we found is that overall, both parents and children preferred the Paradigm of the Circle of Trust app compared to a baseline app that worked more like a regular parental control app. And some of our key findings were that even parents liked the idea of giving their children some trust, but this app was better suited for older adolescents rather than younger children, because the parents wanted to have more transparency and just see all of the messages when they were on the younger spectrum of that age range. Some of the qualitative results from the paper are, in terms of privacy, is the youth liked it because your parents can't see everything. But it did show their parents and they were okay with it if there were some things that were potentially risky. It helped not only promote trust between the parent and the teen, but also helped parents mediate and talk to their teens about how to assess whether somebody was trustworthy. And that was a really important takeaway from this app, is that it facilitated that level of communication beyond kind of the just surveillance-based policing of what they were doing online. And then a lot of the parents liked it because that communication aspect was increased because of the app. The next initiative that we're doing as part of my career proposal is building a participatory action research and design group called Teenavate. Now we're using the methodology of participatory design, where we're elevating youth to be equal design partners in conceptualizing new online safety technologies that would benefit them. Instead of us being the designers and the builders and teens being and parents being evaluators as stakeholders, we want to involve them in every step of the process. We did an initial focus group study with 21 teens, and we found that just asking them to co-design online safety solutions wasn't enough. Instead, they wanted to be the researcher. So we are going to engage with Youth Participatory Action Researcher, YPAR, to engage these teens as researchers to help us formulate the research questions, conduct the research, as well as doing co-design for online safety. And to do this, we're using a research apprenticeship model where we're teaching them how to do research as well as use industry standard user experience prototyping tools like Figma, so that they can do high fidelity prototypes of their designs. Here's an example of a study that we recently ran where we are having them design online safety nudges for private message context. And this is forthcoming work to be published by my PhD student, Zainab Aga, who's currently interning for Meta. So this is where I want to add a word of caution. And this is where I like having an interactive talk where people can actually tell me the answer to my question, but I'll just talk to myself. So what this image is of a fighter plane that came back from the war, and they did a study to assess where the plane needed to be reinforced to be able to make it more invulnerable to attacks. Well, if you look at this plane and based on where the bullet holes are, you would conclude that, okay, well, we need to reinforce it around the middle, at the edge of the wings, and at the tail wing as well. And I'm not sure if those are good, proxies for what those parts of the plane are called. But unfortunately, if we made that conclusion, we would have had a logical fallacy, which is called survivor-based bias. What survivor-based bias is when you study a subpopulation that thrived or succeeded or survived, such as planes coming back from the war, rather than the ones who fell victim and didn't return. So the inverse would be true in terms of the places of where to reinforce this plane, such as around, I guess, what looks like the gas tank in the middle of the wings, or maybe it would just shoot them off and can no longer fly, right? So how does this relate to teens? Well, what we know about teens in general is that the ones who struggle offline are often the teens who struggle the most online. And so treating all teens like they're victims and thinking that online safety and risk is an epidemic and that we all need to become helicopter parents in order to protect them online could potentially disadvantage the youth that are actually at high risk for these online risky situations. For instance, like foster youth, who are one of the highest rate victims of sex trafficking. So in thinking about the more vulnerable youth, I proposed research on reducing digital inequality among youth by empowering these at-risk youth to be more resilient against sexual predation risks. And the idea behind this study is to focus on the subpopulations of youth that are more susceptible to online sexual predation. And that often includes younger girls who are people of color from lower socioeconomic status, as well as those in unstable family situations, such as those in the foster care system. So we received a Best Paper Award for our CHI 2019 paper, where we interviewed 29 foster parents of adolescents to understand the types of risks that these teens encountered online, how the parents mediated these risks, and also their level of technology expertise. So on the right side here, we have a Sankey diagram illustrating some of the qualitative themes from this research. So one of the first findings is that by and large, foster youth encountered very high risk situations. Most of these involving sexual solicitations from older men or even people that were the reason, such as parents who sexually abused them, who put them in the foster care system in the first place. But because of these high risk situations and the need to protect the youth, many of the foster parents resorted to mediation strategies that revolved around restriction, taking away their tablets, not giving them internet access or a phone plan to be able to have mobile data. And many of the reasons the parents did this is that they had kind of a low level of technology savviness because they didn't feel confident in their ability to monitor the technologies to be able to protect the youth from these severe online situations. Some of the qualitative results from this study can illustrate this in more depth. For instance, here, I'm not going to read it out loud, and I apologize. I really should put a trigger warning on my title slide. Many of these were young children and teens who were engaging with adult strangers online for sexual interactions that were inappropriate for their age. Parents felt this trauma and attention because agencies wanted them to promote normalcy in their homes by giving the youth access to technology. But the parents realized that these teens didn't have a normal upbringing, and so they needed to resort to different strategies to protect them online. Because teens use technologies to elope or run away or get involved in sex trafficking and have liaisons with older men, they often just had to take away these technologies altogether and had this sense of desperation of like, what am I supposed to do? They've already done and seen everything, and I can't take care of their basic needs as much as just trying to monitor everything they're doing online. So with that, we realized we need to do more research of understanding the experience of vulnerable youth by conducting more research that engage with their day-to-day interactions with people online. So we started building an EMA, Ecological Momentary Assessment diary app, to collect daily reports about their online activities. But before doing this, we wanted to do a meta study on best practices for conducting risky research with teens. So combining that with the co-design work that we're doing, we did a focus group study of 20 teens and had them co-design the EMA diary app as well as do some journaling and storyboarding and semi-structured interviews with parents to understand some of the things that we need to take into consideration before engaging in this high risk, high reward research. So some of the things that we found out is that youth in general want to be involved in sensitive research about online risks, but we need to make sure that it benefits them and we show them how their participation is benefiting others. So by being able to do infographics and outreach events to show them that they're making an impact. Another interesting thing that we found is that the youth often thought that because they were participating in risk-based research, that we as a researcher could then be a line of defense in helping protect them online. And we had to handle this in a few different ways. So one, in our IRB protocols, we have to disclose that we're child abuse mandated reporters, meaning that if they disclose something within the study that shows imminent risk to themselves, that we would have to report that to the proper authorities. We also had to state warnings such as sharing child pornography is a federal offense and that they would have to be reported for it, and give them the ability to delete data before sharing that. So some of the other things that we do for use protection was like having to get an NIH waiver of confidentiality or a certificate of confidentiality to prevent any kind of legal discovery from the data that they're sharing. And most of all, it's just building that trust relationship with our participants so that they know that we're not trying to get them or anybody else in trouble by collecting their data. This is the EMA diary study that we currently have ongoing. We're recruiting youth, I believe just in the US, so sorry that your population is not included, to be able to participate in this 30-day diary study. So for the last project in this space that I want to cover is our PFI grant on human-centered algorithms for detecting online risks. So because we know that not all youth can use self-regulation and resilience to be able to protect themselves and maintain their privacy online, we wanted to address some of the knowledge gaps and technical barriers to creating risk detection algorithms for preemptively detecting these risks in social media data to be able to intervene in some appropriate way. The first barrier is the ability to collect ecologically valid training data sets. Oftentimes when we're doing machine learning projects on things like cyberbullying or sexual solicitations, researchers are doing this on public data sets scraped from places like Twitter. What we know about teens is that the most risky situations online happen in private spaces, such as sliding into their DMs. The next challenge is establishing a robust ground truth for what online risk actually is. I've seen some parental control apps out there that just have some basic word filters, like if you say the F word, that flags it as risk. Is cussing really a risk that we need to mitigate for youth, or should we maybe reduce some of those false positives by having higher and more intelligent thresholds? The next is extracting the right features for risk detection. So going beyond just the semantic or linguistical cues to also thinking about context. So the time of day a message is sent is often indicative of how risky it could be, or the context of a relationship between a teen and another person, whether it's a stranger, a friend, or a significant other. Also integrating human-centeredness throughout the process on how we collect data, annotate it, develop solutions, and evaluate the algorithms developed from this technology, and then being able to commercialize these technologies for the benefit of all. So here's how we started to approach that problem. We launched this initiative called the Instagram Data Donation Project, where we've asked over about 200 teens at this point, actually teens and young adults between the ages of 13 and 21, to donate their Instagram data files for the purposes of research. We have them donate their data file, and then we write that to our database, and then we present their private message conversations back to them to flag them for any risks that made them feel uncomfortable or unsafe online, and then provide some basic contextual information about these experiences. So in a sense, we're getting teens to ground truth code their own data. These are stats as of February 2022. We have almost 200 participants now, with over 14,000 conversations, with over 2,000 of these conversations that they flagged as unsafe for some reason. And here are the distributions of the high, medium, and low risks in this data set. We also built a data annotation tool where we have 2 research assistants coding every conversation to identify additional risks, to understand the differences in ground truth data coding between participants and those who are third parties. This is just an example from our data set of some of the sexual innuendo that's common for our youth participants. So the next step is moving towards that commercialization plan, is that we've launched a new organization, and we haven't incorporated or anything yet, called Most Safely, or Modus Operandi Safely, where we want to help youth engage more safely online. This is going to be structured as an open source community and consortium of individuals from researchers, clinicians, machine learning experts, and more, to use artificial intelligence to protect youth online. We're hoping to build a software as a service API based on some of our initial research and development for early risk detection, to move the onus of monitoring for these online risks away from parental control apps and third parties to the social media companies and other platforms where teens are encountering these risks. We have already launched the website and are starting to put together the affiliate consortium, and we would love to partner with any of you. With that, I'm going to take a little bit of time to talk about some of my bread and butter privacy research that's more central to the privacy folks and less about adolescent online safety. One project that we had some funding for, we got a Mozilla grant as well as a SATC grant from National Science Foundation, is using the idea of community oversight to help people manage both their digital and physical security. For this project, we've built a number of apps that are fully functional and being beta tested. The one on the left is co-ops, or community oversight of privacy and security, where we're having people in small trusted groups install an app on their Android devices that reads the app manifest to show one another the apps that are installed on their device and the different permissions granted to those apps, so that they can co-manage their safety and their security as a group. This is an ongoing research study that we've had some interesting results thus far. On the left, on the right, we have another app that we called Misu, or Mi Casa es Su Casa, which is based on research where we found that people actually share their smart home devices with people who live outside of their home. A use case for when somebody might do this might be when they have a pet sitter coming over when they're out of town to be able to walk their pets, or maybe go on a vacation, or they give access to a parent or a adult child who's living outside of the home. And one of the limitations of current software access control is that it's kind of this all or nothing access, instead of something that's more contextual and granular, to be able to manage based on a schedule, for instance, or by geofencing, to be able to alleviate some of the privacy concerns of sharing access to, for instance, a camera in your living room to your next door neighbor. I'm also part of the HCI Network privacy research community. These are a number of the workshops that we've held over the years, and I believe there's probably some that I don't have listed here, but I just wasn't a co-organizer of it. And we recently published an open access book on Springer on modern socio-technical perspectives on privacy. I have 3 chapters in there. One is about my teen online safety and privacy work. Another is on common privacy frameworks and theories that we use in our field. And another one is about social media and privacy, looking at the context of how people interact on those platforms. All right, well, thank you. I don't know how I'm doing on time, but I'm usually running over, so I will go ahead and take any questions you might have. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, speaker. Great. So as we said before, if you have any questions, you can put them in the Q&A box. While we're getting started with that, please go ahead and put in your questions. I jotted one down. In your Circles of Trust app,
Yep.
was it the case that the teens would, their friends they're communicating with also had to be using the Circle of Trust app, or was the app able to monitor other apps' communications?
So the limitation, let me see if I can find this. So the limitation of what we built is that this was only based on SMS and MMS messages. So there's obviously this missing link of if they use WhatsApp or Facebook Messenger or any other private messaging conversation platforms, it was not being monitored. And that's just kind of an age-old problem in the space of parental control apps, because after Cambridge Analytica, most of the platforms out there shut off their APIs for them to be able to get this data from those third-party platforms to be able to do parental monitoring. So what this does is it gets any of the messages sent or received to the teen's phone. Some of the future iterations that we could see would be having it send an automated message to whomever the teen's communicating with to say that they're being monitored as one possible way of handling that. Did that answer the question, or?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Thank you. No one's jumped in with a question so far.
Quiet today.
I'll let
So now that you've seen my presentation, Ian, I would love to start thinking about collaborations on ways to handle. Oh, there's a question from Jen, so I'll go ahead and take that first, and then go back to my previous train of thought. Yeah. Sure. So the industry-focused user experience.
Can you repeat the question for the?
Oh, okay. Other people don't see it. Okay. It says, can you tell us more about your industry-focused user experience academy? So this is a little bit contextual to University of Central Florida. I'm in the Department of Computer Science, which is in the College of Engineering and Computer Science. One of the things that I've noticed with my students, especially my undergrads in computer science and information technology, is that there's a small group of students who want to go into user experience careers, but we don't really have the curriculum to support that career trajectory, because either if they go into CS or IT, it's more on the technical side here at UCF, or they could go to the College of Arts and Humanities and do digital arts and media, which is a little bit more on the design-based side. And so I created the Industry-Focused User Experience Academy as an integrative research and industry experience for the students at UCF to be able to work on industry projects to do UX consulting services. So for instance, we did a project for Bogan Communications, which was building a voice over IP public broadcasting systems for schools. And we did usability testing as well as prototype design for them. And the importance of partnering with local companies and others to do these UX consulting services is that it's important that we integrate our research with practice to be able to, one, keep ourselves current, as well as to be able to bridge those opportunities and to be able to bring our research out from, the peer-reviewed journals or conferences and the paywalls to be able to make broader contributions to society. Oh, another question from Dan. There there are worries that parents who would be willing to participate in, have their kids participate in this kind of research would also be much more supportive of their kids' privacy in the first case. Like, I'm thinking that parents who support abstinence-only sex ed aren't likely to be willing to have their kids be part of studies like yours. I'm wondering if this matters. You're right. So there is a selection bias for all research. And so we have to take that into consideration. For instance, for the Instagram data donation study, one of the things that we were surprised about is that we have a much larger than in the natural population of LGBTQ youth who've participated in our study. And I believe one reason for that is when we asked them to participate in a study to talk about their online risk experiences that made them feel uncomfortable or unsafe, those are the teens that self-selected. What we find is that it's more the authoritarian parents who've participated in our research and the more engaged parents. So one of the things that we tried to do for our EMA diary study, because we're trying to reach those more vulnerable populations of youth, is get a waiver of parental consent, which in the social sciences, in studies about sexual risk, for instance, HIV, there is a precedence of waiving parental consents for sexual health education research. Unfortunately, because I'm in a department of computer science, they've not given us the ability to waive parental consent. And so one of the limitations that we're facing is that sometimes the teens who want to participate in our studies, because they are encountering these risks, have parents who aren't engaged and so don't consent for them to participate. And so that's something that we constantly struggle with, is making sure that we have diverse samples and also identifying the sampling bias that we possibly have in our studies. Great question. Next question is, even with information in chats hidden, parents may have a feeling and have an idea. How would a child develop a skill of starting a talk from a point in which other person doesn't have a context? And if a parent starts to play every time, then child may pick something else and incorrectly associates insincerity with touchy topics. I think I need you to clarify a little bit. So one of the things that we did in our earlier work in the diary study is compared the difference between child and parent reports. And one of the things that we found is, even for those highly engaged parents who participated in a 2-month diary study with their teen, very few of them knew the types of risks and experiences their teens encountered online. So even for those active and engaged parents, they didn't really have a good idea of what their kids were up to online. In another study that we did with younger children, you're right that starting that conversation with parents is really hard. And it's often because parents have that fear-based reaction where, for instance, a teen might see a naked picture because it was sent by a friend through a Vine or something, and they had no intention of seeing it, but you know that social media is this fire hose. So in talking to the parents, what'll happen sometimes is that the parent will have this fear-based reaction and say, okay, well, you're not allowed to go on X social media platform anymore. And that kind of defeats the purpose, because what happens from the teen's perspective is they're like, you know, it's not my fault this happened. I didn't want it to happen. I was asking for help, but now I'm in trouble. So I'm not going to talk to my parents about things like this anymore. And so I think as parents, it's important for us to have those more thoughtful and engaged conversations to help our teens navigate some of these situations. So instead of being angry if your teen comes to you and says, you know, I got this message to be a sugar baby, maybe proactively going to them with some scenarios of saying, like, so, you know, you're probably going to get a sexual proposition online. Like, let's talk about some strategies of how you might handle that. So that way your children know that you're open to having those types of conversations with them, and it'll facilitate more conversations. If that doesn't answer your question, you're welcome to put another reframed question in the Q&A, and I'll be happy to answer that too. All right.
Any last questions? Going once? Okay, let's thank our speaker again. All right, and as usual, the speaker will be meeting with students in the next room, in the student meeting room, and so please do head over to that, and we may as well just start that right away.
Awesome. And thanks, Joyce.
Okay, thank you all for coming.
Thanks. I'll log out and I'll see everybody in the other cyberspace.